My husband was on a business trip when my manipulative mother-in-law and sister-in-law threw my belongings out of the house, blaming me for being an outsider. Their next plan was to sell my condo and force me onto the streets to beg, but my secret revenge ruined their plan. My name is Harper Carter, and if there's one thing I've learned in life, it's that family isn't always defined by blood. Sometimes, the ones you trust the most are the ones who will betray you in ways you never imagined. But let me start from the beginning. I was 8 years old when my life shattered. My parents died in a tragic car accident, leaving me alone in a world I wasn't ready to face. The days after their funeral were a blur. Relatives whispered about who would take me, but no one actually wanted me. I remember sitting on the porch of our house, staring at the road, hoping my parents would somehow walk back through the door. Then came the Hendersons, my elderly neighbors. They weren't related to me by blood, but they saw something in me that no one else did. Mr. and Mrs. Henderson took me in, fed me, clothed me, and most importantly, loved me. We didn't have much, but we were happy. I grew up in Atlanta, Georgia, in a small but cozy house filled with warmth. Mr. Henderson was a retired schoolteacher, and he would help me with my homework every night. Mrs. Henderson was a gentle woman who baked the best apple pie. Life wasn't perfect, but it was stable. I had a home. I had parents again. But fate had other plans. When I was 20, just as I was preparing for college, tragedy struck again. A fire broke out in our house, late one night. By the time I woke up to the smell of smoke, it was too late. The firefighters pulled me out just in time, but the Hendersons didn't make it. In the span of a few hours, I lost the only family I had left. The house was gone. My life was gone. I had no choice but to sell the small piece of land it stood on. With the little money I got, I packed up and moved to Miami, Florida, determined to start over. I enrolled in college to study finance, hoping that if I could understand money, maybe I could control my future a little better. Those years were tough. I worked 2 jobs, barely slept, and had no one to rely on. But I kept going, telling myself that I would never be helpless again. After graduating, I landed a great job as a financial consultant. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills and gave me a sense of security. For the first time, I felt like I was in control of my life. Then I met Ryan Carter. It was at a business event. I wasn't looking for love, but there he was, charming, ambitious, and full of life. He made me laugh in a way I hadn't in years. We talked about everything and nothing, and by the end of the night, I didn't want to say goodbye. 2 years later, he proposed in the most Ryan way possible. No grand gestures, no audience. Just the 2 of us on the couch watching an old movie. He pulled a ring from his pocket and said, "Marry me," like it was the simplest decision in the world. And for me, it was. We got married and built a life together in Miami. We weren't rich, but we were happy. For the first time since I was a child, I felt safe. But happiness never seems to last long in my life. One evening, Ryan came home with big news. He had been offered an international business opportunity that could change our future. The catch? He had to leave for a whole year. It wasn't ideal, but I encouraged him to take it. After all, we had our whole lives ahead of us. What was 1 year apart? What I didn't know was that this 1 year would change everything. Shortly after Ryan left, his parents, George and Margaret Lancaster, fell ill. His mother, Margaret, called me in tears, begging me to come to Orlando to help them. I didn't hesitate. They were family. I packed my bags, arranged to work remotely, and moved into their house in the suburbs of Orlando. At first, things were fine. George was weak, but still had his spirit, and Margaret was grateful for my help. I managed their medications, cooked, cleaned, and made sure they had everything they needed. I even sent money from the rent I earned on my Miami condo to help with their expenses. Then, one day, Nicole Palmer walked through the door. Nicole was Margaret's daughter from a previous relationship. I had never met her before, but Ryan had warned me about her. She had a history of trouble, laziness, and manipulation, but I had no idea just how much damage she could do. From the moment she arrived, she made it clear. I was an outsider in her mother's house. She didn't even pretend to be nice. She ignored me, made passive-aggressive remarks, and dismissed everything I did. At first, I tried to brush it off. I told myself she was just adjusting to the situation. But then, Margaret started changing too. She stopped thanking me for my help. She became colder, more distant. And every time Nicole whispered to her behind my back, I knew something was being said about me. I had no proof, but I could feel it. The walls of the house were closing in on me. And then George passed away. Ryan flew home for the funeral, and I finally had a moment of relief, thinking that with him back, things would get better. But I couldn't bring myself to tell him what was happening. Not yet. He had just lost his father, and I didn't want to add to his pain. After the funeral, Ryan left again, promising he'd be back as soon as he could. But the moment his plane took off, Nicole made her move. One day, I came home from a grocery run to find all my belongings dumped in the garage. My clothes, my shoes, everything. I walked inside, furious. What the hell is going on? Nicole sat at the kitchen table, smirking. Oh, don't look so shocked, Harper. This isn't your house. You're just a guest. Margaret stood beside her, silent. She didn't even look at me. That night, I checked my bank account and felt my stomach drop. Someone had drained a large amount of money from my account. I confronted Margaret, but she acted completely indifferent. You're exaggerating, she said. We needed the money. That was the moment I knew I was no longer family. I was their target, and I had to get out before things got worse. But Nicole wasn't going to let me leave that easily. I should have left that night. I should have packed my bags and walked out the door. But a part of me still clung to the idea that maybe things would get better. Maybe Margaret would come to her senses. Maybe I was overreacting. I wasn't. The next morning, I found Nicole lounging on the couch, flipping through a stack of my bank statements. My bank statements. I snatched them from her hands. What the hell, Nicole? She smirked, completely unfazed. Relax. I was just trying to understand how someone like you managed to own a Miami condo. Must have been nice, huh? I felt a chill run down my spine. Stay out of my things. She leaned back, sipping coffee like she owned the house. You don't get it, do you? You don't belong here. You never did. I clenched my fists. I'm here because your mother asked for my help. Nicole rolled her eyes. Right. And now you've done enough. Why don't you be useful and sign over that Miami condo to Mom? She's struggling, you know. That's when it clicked. This wasn't just about making me uncomfortable. This was about money. My money. I turned to Margaret, who had just walked into the room. Margaret, tell me this isn't true. You're not trying to take my home from me. Margaret wouldn't even look at me. She just stood there, wringing her hands. It's not like that, dear. We just thought you wouldn't mind helping out. Helping out? They had already drained thousands from my account behind my back. Now they wanted me to give them everything I had. I shook my head. Absolutely not. Nicole's smirk vanished. Her eyes darkened. You really think you're better than us, don't you? I didn't answer. I grabbed my bag, stormed up the stairs, and locked my bedroom door. My hands were shaking. I needed to leave. Tonight. But Nicole had other plans. That night, as I packed, my bedroom door burst open so hard it slammed against the wall. Before I could react, Nicole grabbed me by the arm and shoved me against the dresser. The edge of the wood dug into my back as she leaned in close, her breath hot and furious against my face. You think you can just walk away? She hissed. You owe us. I shoved her back, but she was stronger than I expected. She grabbed a fistful of my shirt and yanked me forward, causing me to stumble. My head smacked against the nightstand, sending a sharp pain through my skull. I tasted blood. Margaret stood in the hallway, watching. Not stopping her. Just watching. That was the moment I knew I was on my own. Nicole stood over me, breathing heavily, waiting for me to fight back. But I wasn't going to play her game. I wasn't going to break, not in front of her. Slowly, I wiped the blood from my lip and forced myself to stand. You're making a mistake, Nicole. She laughed, shaking her head. No, Harper. The mistake was letting you in here in the first place. I stared at Margaret, hoping, praying, for some kind of humanity. Some sign that she knew this was wrong. But her expression was cold. Empty. I was nothing to her now. I walked past them, ignoring the throbbing in my head, and locked myself in the bathroom. My hands were shaking as I grabbed my phone. I needed to get out of here. But then, I heard voices outside the door. "She won't leave," Nicole said. "Not unless we force her." My heart started pounding. Margaret's voice was hesitant. "Nicole, maybe we're going too far." "No," Nicole snapped. "She's weak. She'll cave." I backed away from the door. They weren't just trying to intimidate me anymore. They were planning something worse. I needed proof. I hit record on my phone and pressed it against the door. Their voices spilled into the tiny space. "She'll never sell unless she has no other option," Nicole said. "We just need to keep pushing. She'll break. And once she does, we'll take everything." I had enough. I grabbed my bag, shoved my phone inside, and quietly unlocked the bathroom window. I wasn't going to wait around for whatever they had planned next. I was done playing nice. I climbed out into the night, feet hitting the cold grass. I didn't look back. I ran. The second my feet hit the grass, I sprinted through the backyard, my heart hammering so loudly I could barely hear anything else. The night air was cold, but my skin burned with adrenaline. I didn't care about anything except getting away. I reached the street and pulled out my phone. My hands were shaking as I called a cab. I knew I couldn't go back inside for my car, not without facing Nicole again. As I stood under a flickering streetlight, waiting, I kept my eyes on the house. I half expected Nicole to come charging out after me, but the door stayed closed. Maybe she thought she had scared me into submission. She had no idea what was coming. The moment I got in the cab, I called Ryan. He answered groggily. He was still overseas, and it was the middle of the night where he was. "Harper." His voice was thick with sleep. "What's wrong?" I took a shaky breath. "Ryan, I need you to listen carefully. Your mother and Nicole, they've been stealing from me. They drained my account. And tonight, Nicole attacked me." Silence. Then, his voice turned deadly serious. "Where are you now?" "In a cab. I'm going straight to Miami." "Good. Don't stop. I'm booking the next flight home." For the first time that night, I let out a shaky breath of relief. I wasn't alone. By the time I got back to my apartment in Miami, I felt like I had just escaped a war zone. I locked the door, closed the curtains, and immediately backed up all the recordings on my laptop. I replayed Nicole's words over and over. "She'll never sell unless she has no other option. We just need to keep pushing. She'll break. And once she does, we'll take everything." I wasn't going to break. I wasn't going to let them win. The next day, I called my bank. I reported the unauthorized transactions, froze my accounts, and filed a fraud report against Margaret and Nicole. Then I went to the police. I played the recording, showed them the bruises on my arms, and filed an assault charge against Nicole. It felt surreal, like I was finally taking my power back. 3 days later, Ryan arrived home. The second he stepped inside, I collapsed into his arms, finally letting go of everything I had been holding in. He held me tightly, his anger barely contained. "I should have been there," he murmured, kissing the top of my head. "You're here now," I whispered. But I wasn't done yet. That afternoon, we drove back to Orlando. Not to stay. Not to make peace. But to end this once and for all. We pulled up in front of the house, and just as I expected, Nicole was outside on the porch, looking smug as ever. She stood when she saw me. "Well, look who's back. Did you finally?" Ryan stormed past her, straight into the house. "Mom," he bellowed. "Get out here. Now." Margaret stepped into the living room, looking nervous. She glanced at me, then at Ryan. "Ryan, honey, Don't," Ryan snapped. "I know everything. Harper told me what's been happening. The money you stole, the way you treated her, how you stood there and let Nicole attack my wife." Nicole folded her arms. "Oh, please. She's overreacting." Ryan turned on her so fast that she actually took a step back. "Shut up." His voice was cold, controlled, but his fury filled the entire room. Nicole scoffed. "What are you going to do, huh? Call the cops?" Ryan's smile was ice. "Too late. They're already on their way." Nicole's face drained of color. Margaret gasped. Ryan, no. You made your choice, Mom. His voice shook with emotion, but he didn't waver. You picked Nicole over me. Over Harper. And now you're going to pay for it. Margaret turned to me, her eyes pleading. Harper, sweetheart, you wouldn't do this to family. I stared at her for a long moment. Then, I spoke calmly, firmly, without hesitation. You were never my family. Sirens blared outside. And for the first time since I met her, Nicole Palmer looked scared. As the police cars pulled up in front of the house, Nicole's cocky smirk finally vanished. She glanced at Margaret, as if expecting her to do something, but Margaret looked just as pale and stunned. Ryan stepped beside me, his hand firm on my back, offering silent support. Two officers approached the porch, their expressions unreadable. Harper Carter, one of them asked. I nodded. Yes. I'm the one who filed the report. I handed them the audio recordings, the bank statements, and the medical report documenting the bruises on my arms. The officers listened, their faces darkening as they played back Nicole's own words incriminating herself. One of the officers turned to Nicole. Miss Palmer, we need you to come with us. Nicole flinched. Wait, what? This is ridiculous. She turned to Margaret. Mom, do something. Margaret just stood there, her face twisted in panic. Officer, this is all a misunderstanding. Ma'am, the officer interrupted, his tone firm. We have enough evidence for fraud and assault charges. Your daughter is coming with us. Nicole tried to push past them, but another officer grabbed her arms. You can't do this, she screamed. Ryan, you're really letting them arrest me? For hers? Ryan's expression didn't waver. You did this to yourself. Nicole's face twisted with rage. She looked at me, and for a moment, I thought she might lunge at me again. But instead, she spat out, You ruined my life. I didn't flinch. No, Nicole. You ruined your own life. The officers hauled her toward the squad car as she kicked and screamed the whole way. Margaret turned to Ryan, her voice breaking. Ryan, please, she's your sister. She made mistakes, but she's family. Ryan stared at her for a long moment, his jaw tight, his eyes cold. You stopped being my mother the moment you let her put her hands on my wife. Margaret reached for him, desperate. Please, son, don't leave me like this. I have nothing left. I thought, for a moment, Ryan might soften. But then he took a step back and shook his head. This was your choice, Mom. His voice was quiet but firm. And I'm making mine. Margaret broke down right there on the porch as the squad car pulled away, taking Nicole with it. I should have felt guilty. I should have felt something. But all I felt was relief. A few weeks later, Nicole was formally charged with fraud and theft. It turned out I wasn't the only one she had been stealing from. Several elderly victims came forward once the news broke. The state had more than enough evidence to convict her. She was sentenced to 8 years in prison. Margaret, on the other hand, lost everything. With Nicole gone, she had no money, no support, and no way to afford the house. She called once, a desperate, shaky voicemail. Harper, sweetheart, I made a mistake. I was weak, and I let Nicole take control. I know I hurt you, but please, please help me. I have no one else. I sat there, listening to the message in silence. Then I deleted it. She had made her choice. I was never going back. In the months that followed, Ryan and I focused on rebuilding our lives. We moved into a new home in Tampa, far away from the ghosts of our past. And then one morning, I took a pregnancy test. When I saw the 2 pink lines, I felt a wave of emotions hit me all at once. Excitement, fear, hope. I sat on the bathroom floor, staring at the test, when Ryan walked in. Harper. He frowned. What's wrong? I looked up at him, tears in my eyes, and whispered, I'm pregnant. His eyes widened, and for a second, he didn't move. Then, without warning, he laughed, a deep, joyful, disbelieving laugh, and pulled me into his arms. We're having a baby, he murmured against my hair. I closed my eyes. We're having a baby. It felt like the final piece of my life falling into place. I had fought. I had suffered. I had lost. But in the end, I won. And as I stood there, in the safety of Ryan's arms, I knew our son, Liam, would never have to know the kind of betrayal I had endured. Because we would protect him. Because we would be the kind of family I had always dreamed of. The past was behind me. The future was mine. And I was finally free.